Pretty excited to have Colonel Christopher C.J. Douglas, somebody that I served with in the Marine Corps, and our relationship goes back about 30-some years. I have an incredible amount of respect for C.J. He's served this nation honorably. He's done 5 combat tours, and I'll briefly go into them. And he's not only highly decorated, but highly respected throughout the Marine Corps. And I just want to spend a couple minutes and talk about his background a little bit. But to be able to read that, I need to put on these glasses. It helps me to read. And I know a lot of you wear glasses out there. So please, no comments about the reading glasses. My grooming is good. I've got no tattoos. And C.J. Douglas, he entered the Marine Corps in 1991. Was assigned to 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines as a platoon commander. Participated in Operations Continue Hope in Somalia and Provide Promise and Deny Flight in the Adriatic Sea. And he also participated in Support Democracy in Haiti. After that, because there's augmentation issues in the Marine Corps, he decided to go in the Marine Reserves. And as a Marine Reserve officer, he also joined the New York State Police as a trooper. So some of you may recognize him. He may have given you a ticket if you happen to drive through New York. And currently, he joined the 2nd Battalion, the 25th Marines, participated in JTF 6 missions in Arizona-Mexican border. And then in 1997, he was assigned to the basic school as an instructor, as a warfighting instructor until 2001. So he's got an incredible amount of experience already. Then following 9/11, he came back to support active duty Marines and assumed command of Company F, 2nd Battalion, 25th Marines. And then he was recalled to active duty to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And so we sort of touched bases again. And then he deployed as a commanding officer, Company F, to Operation Iraqi Freedom, and was recalled to active duty as commander of Company K, 3rd Battalion, 25th Marines, and deployed again in support of Iraqi freedom. So he's already done 2 combat tours in Iraq. And then in 2006, he was again brought back as a commander of Company K, 3rd Battalion, 25th Marines, and was sent on a deployment to Australia. Not a bad gig. And in 2012, he was selected to command 1st Battalion, 24th Marines. Now, let me tell you something. It's very difficult to command an infantry battalion in the Marine Corps on the active duty side, on the reserve side, because there aren't that many of them. I believe there's like 24 or 28 total battalions in the Marine Corps, active duty and reserve. So it's really they really handpick the battalion commanders, and CJ is one of them. And then from there, he after his command time, he went and became the advisor team leader for Security Forces Advise and Assist Team in Afghanistan. Did a tour there, came back to the U.S., and then deployed again as a task force commander to Task Force Taqadum in El Anbar province to Iraq. So that's his 4th combat tour. Comes back to the United States and then deploys back to Afghanistan as a advisor for the Afghan security forces conducting operations in Helmand province. So CJ has seen the global war of terrorism from both sides. Conducting multiple combat tours. Then after he gets done with his deployments, he comes back to the United States and serves as the G5 for MARCENT, which is down in Central Command in Tampa, Florida. And he becomes very familiar with the plans for the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and then he's sent forward to Qatar to help with evacuations. So he's got firsthand knowledge of what the hell happened there. Then after the incident at Abbey Gate, where we lost 13 service members, he was assigned to the investigation team of what happened at Abbey Gate. And as part of that investigation team, he's got incredible knowledge of what actually transpired. Because, as you well know in combat, no one really sees the entire picture. You're just seeing everything from a soda straw, based on your sectors of fire, what you're seeing through the aperture of your weapon. You may not know what's going on 2 guys down from you. What is he seeing? So it's really interesting to listen to CJ. And he's highly decorated. CJ's got 2... Legions of Merit with the Combat Distinguishing Device. He also has 2 Bronze Stars. He's got a Purple Heart, and he's got 3 Combat Action Ribbons, and he's got a Navy Commendation Medal with the Combat He's not only a highly decorated officer with an incredible amount of experience, but he's also a man of integrity and a man of honor, and I know for a fact that he's very well respected throughout the Marine Corps. And I'll tell you this much: there aren't too many Marine officers with that many combat tours and the experience that CJ has. So I'm really proud to have him as my first guest on this podcast. And given the totality of what happened during the withdrawal of Afghanistan, it's going to take probably a few parts to discuss this thing, because I don't want to give you a 2-hour podcast. I'd rather give you shorter segments that you can really digest in your free time and think about it and leave comments. So I'm really excited about it. But before we start, I just want to remind everybody to make sure that you please hit a like, share, and subscribe on the channel. And this will be the first part of a multi-part series with CJ Douglas. So let's dig into it. Ladies and gentlemen, I've got Colonel Christopher Douglas here. Him and I go way back to the early 90s. We served together many times. And he's like my little brother in the Marine Corps, and I'm really honored to have him here on this podcast. This is the first one that I'm doing with a guest, and the reason I wanted to bring him here is because he's got an incredible background. Aside from his 5 combat tours, as we discussed in the introduction, he spent a lot of time in Afghanistan and was involved in the withdrawal from Kabul, and later on, he was also involved in the investigation. So he can give us some insights of that. So before we start, I'd just like to welcome you, Chris. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to see you after all these years. Oh.
Yes, it's been many years. It's been a couple of decades, I think. But so please, if you just briefly go into your origin story, and then we'll go right into the role that you played in the withdrawal, and then we'll talk about specifically about some of what the plan was, command and control, force protection, rules of engagement, and any logistics issues. And then I'd like to talk about the lessons learned and what could we have done different. So on that note, the floor is yours.
So I started out wanting to enlist in the Marine Corps after high school because I really wanted to serve. I played soccer and wrestled in high school, and my last year I decided before I go in the Marines, I want to play football. Tried out. I was actually terrible as a defensive back, but it turned out I could kick. So I ended up going and kicking in college. Spring break my freshman year, decided I still want to serve. Went to the recruiter. There wasn't. I figured at least if something happens, I'll join the reserves. There wasn't a Marine Reserve unit close to my college. Went to MARCENT, which is in New York,
Okay.
and I went down the hall to the Army recruiter who had said, make a few phone calls, and it turned out there was a place a 5-minute walk off the basic training. Saw the next summer off to my second phase of training, and that's where there were some Marines there. I was like, there's something different here. So I had ROTC for the Army, and I was like, I really want to be a Marine. Well, sadly, I got kicked out after my second year for grades, and after getting back in and getting off the academic probation list, was able to play my final season, best season. Whole other long story, but ultimately I graduated, went into law enforcement, and then left because I was accepted to the Marine OCS program, which led me to 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines after I was commissioned. Did 4 years on active duty, and chose to depart because I didn't want to do my next assignment, our B billet as we call it.
Right.
And then went into the New York State Police. Was with balanced being a reservist, having a family, and the Marine Corps. And as 9/11 happened, the first phone call I got was from the Marine Corps. I was set to assume command of my 1st Infantry Company, the first weekend in October. And so the first phone call I got was from the Marine Corps saying, need to start looking at if any Marines that were assigned to the unit were involved in any of the crashes. The next phone call was from the state police recalling me to work. My supervisor was a former company commander of mine from the Marines. And so he as well was very supportive. I activated in December. And then January, the rest of the unit activated. And so we went down to Camp Lejeune. So one of the next times that you and I had crossed paths
Yeah.
when I went to sit down with you and seek your insight on company command,
Yeah.
which was enlightening, but always educational as every interaction was. But a year at Camp Lejeune, which was actually while we didn't go anywhere or do anything for the global war on terrorism, it was great because it gave us the foundation for training to then what led to then the invasion of Iraq shortly thereafter. So that coming back from that, went back to work with the state police. I was back 2 months, and I was asked to redeploy to Iraq and for my second infantry company tour, and then and then that led on to several deployments later. So
Yeah, you deployed quite a bit. I mean, I
yeah,
look at your resume and your CV. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, you went, back to back, Afghanistan, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iraq. So I mean, it's quite commendable, the amount of deployments. But what I wanted to really discuss is I did a podcast on the withdrawal of Kabul withdrawal. And this is an outsider looking in and seeing what some of these issues were. And I think you saw that. And it was primarily to show at a very high level what the policy decisions were. And obviously, as you well know, that policy decisions drive the strategy that drives the operational plan and the tactics. And with your background at MARCENT, I just want to talk about your role at the time when this was happening, and maybe you can set that up prior to what was going on, and what were the indications and warnings that this was going to happen.
yeah. So to set it up, I want to go back just a little bit more beyond before that. And so
Sure.
it was 20, and I had applied to go back on active duty. There was a liaison position at Central Command. And
Okay.
so I was accepted and retired from the state police in preparation to go to Tampa and work for Marine Corps Forces Central Command as a liaison to CENTCOM. I got a phone call saying, "Hey, General Mundy saw you're coming down. He wants to make you the G5." And I'm like, "G5 planning." They're like, there's a little more into it than that.
Yeah.
The good news is um, you're you're going to be here at MARCENT. The bad news is you're going to be pretty busy. And I was like, well, it's General Mundy. I'd love to work for him. Had a lot of respect for him, having crossed paths with him a number
Yeah,
of
it's a good
times
man. Yeah.
in theater. And so I got down to Tampa and had a great staff, and he was great to work with. And so as that was September that I got there, and we were working this plan, an initiative of General Mundy's, the Regional Rapid Response Force, that he had encouraged Middle East partners
Right.
to. It was kind of their idea, but he developed it and led it, and it looked like it was really going to take hold. And so that led us into as the timeline. We knew that the Trump administration had, hey, we've got this timeline for withdrawal. We've drawn in 2,500. And so as we're watching and doing the planning, for what ultimately is like, hey, well, it's a withdrawal, it hasn't been finalized yet. Kind of, Central Command's doing planning, which is involving my planners from MARCENT.
Right.
And as we're, now keep in mind, in this time, this is in my last year. As you know, you can do 30 years of commissioned service, and I'm set to mandatory retire of September of
Right.
21. And so we're in a meeting, and there's an organizational chart of the Afghan army and the security forces, et cetera. And I pointed to one of the general in charge of the army, and I said, "Hey, sir, that's." He's like, I met him." And I'm like, "Actually, you did." So he's like, "Come on down to the office. Let's talk afterwards." So he's like, would you extend? He's like, "This is going to go the way, as we're all, it's like, hey, who predicted this was going to turn into what it did?" Well, General Mundy did. Um, So, so would you extend beyond mandatory retirement? I'm like, well, it's mandatory for a reason. So that he's like, there's a waiver for everything. So as we know, apparently there is. So I got an extension. Well, at that point, he's like, hey, if I, my plan is, if this turns into a Neo, which I imagine it will, my plan is
Hmm.
to go forward um, as he's a 3 star and be forward with this, and you're coming with me. So the April comes along, and there's the decision is made from the president. We are withdrawing from Afghanistan. Now, as I mentioned, there's planning going on, but the one complaint that's going on, I'm going to say in the headquarters is like State Department, whether they're not taking it seriously or there's like this air of denial. And this will come up later, actually more specifically. But ultimately, as General Mundy's like, getting closer to what will be his retirement date, he's like, you know, I know personally that he offered to stay, like he wanted to stay.
Right.
And so I don't think it was General McKenzie's decision. I think it was a headquarters Marine Corps decision that it was like, hey, thanks for your service. We're downgrading MARCENT from a 3 star position to a 2 star position.
That's right.
Your
Yeah.
replacement's already coming in. So I think now this is CJ Douglas speculation. I think what happened is they decided, hey, we're gonna put this position over here, and we're gonna
Right.
use that. We've already got somebody lined up to get promoted, and that's happening. I know as well, the Marine Corps' stance was, we're done with Afghanistan. Like we are done with the Middle East. We're done with CENTCOM. That's somebody else's problem now. We want nothing to do with it. So you've got kind of that culture going on. Now that said, I'm going to say to General Mundy's credit, he didn't just ride the pine or just retire on active duty.
Right.
He worked through the finish line, and so where it was leading and understanding like, hey, look, here's another course of action of how I can I'll just go forward, and again, Marine Corps had other ideas. So that said, he retired. His successor
So
came in.
so Sam was
Yeah,
willing to go forward and
I,
have somebody backfill the Marcent position back in
yeah,
Tampa and just be
yeah,
there as a well.
yep. Yeah, I've got I hold him in the highest regard. I mean,
Yeah.
and it made sense because like, if you were to calculate the amount of time, he had 3 years at Marcent. He had fifth Meb. Um,
Right.
gosh, that was, 2 years, 3 years. He was at CENTCOM. I think he was the
Yeah.
J5. I mean, his amount of time, like he walked into a room with Middle Eastern partners, and he had that wasta as we talk
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like he earned the respect of the partners, and so it isn't just Afghanistan. It was that was the issue. It was we were asking Middle Eastern partners to um, provide safe haven for evacuees. And that's like right in his lane because he's that guy that could walk into a room and make stuff happen. So as
Right.
it's like, hey, well, there's no baby formula in Qatar, all these logistic, like he's a guy that was forward. Like, so I'll say as well. So a peer of his, 3 star, Ron Clark, um, had arson.
Hmm.
When it came time for the evacuation, where was Ron Clark? Forward. He moved his headquarters forward. He's in Qatar. I mean, I ran into him in Qatar because I'd served with him in Iraq in 2015. I ran into him and General Buzzard as well, both in Qatar, working the evacuation issue, working the withdrawal issues forward from Qatar. Um, the successor for General Mundy, as you've mentioned in previous podcasts, Major General Rock,
Right.
he he arrived. He went to the CENTCOM Commanders Conference that was in, right after he assumed command. I think he might have left that same day, right after the conference. It's like a short conference. Boom, he was in DC on a board. I went forward to Qatar to assist with the evacuation. Plan being, as General Mundy's idea was that I'd be able to get to Afghanistan, and that was my goal, and that wasn't in the cards without General Mundy. And so only got to Qatar to assist with the evacuation from there. So now in that period of time from the assumption of command to ultimately where I went forward, what there was, one of the things that General Mundy, had thought, he was like, hey, relationships matter. And the one place they matter the most is in the Middle East and
Right.
specifically Afghanistan.
Absolutely.
And so, as we had that side discussion, he's like, hey, how many of your Afghan counterparts, specifically the one that's in charge of the army, do you have contact with? I was like, well, I've got their contact information, but I have not maintained contact for a number of reasons. One, because I don't want to have to put it on my security clearance, and two, because we know this is going to fall apart. I mean, we can see it just watching the unclassified, just the news, seeing
Right.
how district centers are getting encircled, and it's like you don't have to be a military genius to know that this is going to end badly. I said, so I haven't maintained contact. He's like, I need you to reach out to them. This is for work. It's the same as if you were. He's like, but because we're going to need to. The JTF is going to have to go in. This is going to be a NEO, and so they're going to need the coordination with those partners. So I need you to reach out. So I did, and as I'm sure any of one has been was during the 20 years was in Afghanistan. The calls as the retrograde and withdrawals for the Afghans, not even the U.S. forces, but as they began to lose ground and kind of move to other locations, it was heartbreaking. Getting calls throughout the night where it's like I had to fall back from here, and we're now and we're going to try to circle in Kabul, and it's like and ultimately, so that as things fell apart, then the Marine Corps then began to ask questions like, where are there's three key figures. One was Lieutenant General Sami Sadat.
Mm-hmm.
He had
I
had the
know. Yeah.
215 long history,
Yeah.
just a phenomenal guy. And then he had the 215th Corps, was fighting it out down in Helmand. He got recalled to Kabul to take over special operations and the
Right.
defense of Kabul. And he lands at the time not Karzai, Khalilzad is
Ashraf
leaving.
Ghani. Yeah.
Ghani. Yes, I'm sorry.
Ghani.
Thanks.
Yeah.
He landed when Ghani's leaving. And so it's like, hey, and so, he gets grabbed by some US forces and like, he's like, hey, I guess I'll go out and fight. And they're like, yeah, pretty much you're not going to survive out there. So you're coming with us. So he's in Kabul, General Ahmadzai and General Alizai. And so they're like, oh, we need to know where these guys are. I'm like, I was just on FaceTime with them, like
Hmm.
literally like this morning.
Right.
And so this went on for a couple days until finally it was like TV timeout. Like I FaceTimed with them because I'm trying to find these other people that everybody in the Marine Corps is like, hey, well, we got to find so and so. And I'm like, all three of these guys are sitting in Kabul. And so that then leads to, hey, it's, a Sunday, I get called in to work and how soon can you leave? And I'm like, um, I could leave as soon as I have orders and a plane ticket, much like you would have said.
Right.
And so that Tuesday morning, I grabbed one of the guys from my G5 team, who we'd served together in Afghanistan twice previously, and he and I fly to Qatar to stand up the coordination element there and receive a uh, a um, a debt of Marines that would do the evacuation coordination cell. They were scheduled to go out on a MEU later, so they were already trained and ready.
Right.
And so we met them in Qatar with some dog handlers and like, hey, you're here to assist the Air Force. And again, in my mind, I'm thinking we're still going to get to Afghanistan. We land, and that's when the Abbey Gate Blast had happened. So the mission for us was just specifically, hey, you're here to work coordination with the Air Force, the Marines, and the evacuees. So we pushed
So
28. Good.
let me just interrupt. So this is August, right? So we're looking at August of 2021, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
So the
if
20.
you back up to like January, February timeframe,
Yep.
give us a sense of what the planning was. Did anybody anticipate this is going on? And then things just collapsed. So what was the original plan back in January, February timeframe?
So the one thing I'll say is, Bagram was always the plan.
Mm,
Um, was like, hey, we'll keep Bagram.
right.
Now with that, anecdotally, I will say this. It's like, okay, but knowing personally, like some of my Afghan friends that, were citizens that were trying to get family members through that had worked
Right.
with U.S. forces, the civ process wasn't working. I'm like, well, why isn't it working? Like, and so they're like, well, okay, well, this doesn't make sense, for this, we're going to close everything down and collapse it back to, even if we keep Bagram. It's like,
Right.
because not everybody's going to be able to navigate. So why is it we aren't like negotiating? It's going to be a new administration. Like, hey, you had to deal with the previous administration. We keep the major
Hub.
points open
Yeah.
and we work the civ process. Like, hey, listen, we've got some people here. We've got some U.S. citizens here.
Yeah.
You know, we'll continue with the withdrawal. I loved your idea about leasing Bagram, but until we get to that point where we collapse down to that and we keep the embassy open, we're gonna shuttle people out through, process people through Kandahar, Mazar, um, Bagram,
Yeah.
Kabul, so that we've got multiple, we can surge State Department forces there. They're already secure with U.S. forces. So again, anecdotally, that's in my head, like this makes more sense. If you pause there and you think, you and I had discussed, off camera about how the Soviet withdrawal, like, hey, they took a year. Now they had more people and
Right.
they drove out because I think when they
Yeah.
did their final withdrawal, it was like 100,000. They left some stuff, not as much, but their whole plan of action where they bend it with political, economic, and military. And so, looking at their IO campaign, their national reconciliation, their political reforms for, under policy, their economic with humanitarian aid, stockpiling supplies, and establishing an air bridge. And then with the military, hey, they're doing large scale operations, soft missions, securing major cities and roads, and then continuing to train and equip the NSAF. But the
Right.
key is you didn't just stop at that point and say, hey, we're done. They then kept, I think it was a division in Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, that ultimately then they dropped a brigade into Kandahar and when there was an uprising. And we are like, hey, we'll come back as needed, which gave two things. One, it gave the enemy oh gosh, they'll come back. So we probably don't want to do that. But it also gave the resolve to the Afghan security forces that like, hey, we're not abandoned. One, we're still getting financial support. And two,
Mm,
Big Brother's going to come. So now coming back to ours, like as I mentioned, hey, anecdotally, it's like as we're looking at the plan, and it's like, and you're hearing, well, it's the administration is assessing it or whatever. It's like it's still not totally believable,
right.
but it's like, hey, so there's planning that's going on. And it's like, hey, what's this going to look like? It's going to look like a JTF. So it's like, okay, well, so we got a joint task force, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, headed by, Marine one star. And, it's like, we're going to need this for a command element. We're going to need these forces. I think, I think at one point, I think during the planning, General McKenzie had requested a Marine regiment. I think. I could be wrong, and somebody could correct me later, but that was denied by the Marine Corps. And it took the SecDef to direct the SP MAGTF and the
Right.
MU and do a hold to keep them on station. And those are only done as like 30 days. We keep them on hold for 30 days. So the
So
MU
what
was
what
doing.
time what time frame is this?
So this is as so if you think, I think they were on their second or third. So this would have been, we're now into like July timeframe.
I guess my question is, so what was going on with General Miller, Austin Miller's command in Afghanistan?
Yeah.
Uh, were they the focal point of the planning that was going on, or was CENTCOM doing planning back in Tampa? And prior to General Miller retiring, who was supposed to be the lead effort? Was it General Miller in Afghanistan? Because he'd been there 3 years, right? So
Right.
logically, he'd be the right guy to command this whole thing. Or was there still a question mark that it's going to be CENTCOM driven plan?
So I think it's a CENTCOM driven plan at this point. Now that said, I mean, you know, I love General Miller and have a ton of respect for him, and he
Yeah,
made the perfect sense to be the guy to lead it all the way through.
right.
Um, you know, but he wasn't, and so the planning was going. I think the main planning was taking place at CENTCOM with all the component commands providing um, planners and input, and ultimately the plan coming out of Central Command.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess my concern would be if General Miller's command would be executing the withdrawal, right?
Yes.
So wouldn't you want that command to be responsible for the planning and the execution rather than the plan being driven from Tampa? And then obviously we know that General Miller ended up retiring and McKenzie takes over.
Right.
And then right after that, things fall apart. But the issue is really at the outset, it should have been General Miller's command planning in Kabul, the withdrawal in
Right.
coordination with the Afghans, right?
Right.
That's
There's the big piece right there.
yeah, which never happened.
Right.
So now the question I want to know is who when Bagram was decided, hey, we're pulling out of Bagram, whose
Right.
decision? Obviously, that's at the National Command Authorities. I get that. I mean, that's a big decision. But who executed uh, that decision? Was it Miller? I think Miller had retired by then, or was it McKenzie that executed that decision?
So I'm not sure which one of them. What I do know was before Bagram was vacated,
Yeah,
I do remember that General Miller was like, "Hey, we need to pause because like," and I don't remember what the wording was, but it was like, "This is going to unravel." And I think it was right after that, right after that, that um
I
the command
it,
transitioned. You know, to my words, not
yeah,
General Miller's or anyone else's, is it was almost like TV timeout. Like we pull out of Bagram and this is going to fall apart like immediately.
right.
And so he said it more you know tactical term and professionally than I just said, but
And I
it was something to that effect.
so so then Bagram gets vacated. We pull out of Bagram in the middle of the night
Middle of the night.
with no coordination with the Afghans. And why wasn't
Right.
any coordination done with the Afghan National Army?
So I think that goes back to this has been a complaint that I've had with any of the times that U.S. forces have left any of the areas. Because you remember, 13, 14, I was in Afghanistan as an advisor,
Mm-hmm.
and it
Mm-hmm.
was during the time that the Obama administration had said, "Hey, we're gonna pull out." And so as I'm doing my briefings, I'm saying my Afghan counterparts, my Afghan brigade is effective with U.S. support. They're like,
Right.
so they're effective. No, they're effective with U.S. support. And so it'd be like, well, they're effective. Like, no, we assist them in planning, coordination, execution. We assist with medevac. We assist with indirect fires and aviation fires. Like they need us here in order to
Right.
succeed. Ultimately, we pull out. But during the pullout, it was, you had units that would leave in the middle of the night and not tell the Afghans, like, hey, we're going to turn this base over to you. And then they'd leave and the Afghans would wake up and US forces were driven out. And I was, so General Dan Yu, who I know when we came to leave Fob Nole, which is just south of Sangin, um, I involved our Afghan counterparts in the planning. And I had told them, I said, sir, we're going to need to partner with them to drive out. Otherwise we're going to. And so we retrograded everything. We signed over to them what was going to be theirs. We cleaned any U.S. Sanitized the place, and then together we executed our retrograde operations as a partnered operation. And again, they were part of the planning, the coordination, and the execution. That said, for some reason, there's always been, the OPSEC, like, hey, we don't want to tell our Afghan counterparts, because, like, I guess, whether it's a lack of trust or what, but, it's, they consider themselves allies and partners, you so, that at some point you've got to yeah, you got to trust. You got to have
But think
some
about
level of trust.
the message that sends to the Afghans, right? And I'm not just talking the military, right? These guys have fought with us,
Yep,
and after the Taliban agreement aside, over 1,000 Afghan National Army soldiers have been
yep,
killed fighting for us at the front
yep,
lines because we're back, we're backstopping them. And then in the middle of the night, we vacate Bagram, and the looters come in and start looting everything, right? Because they know the
right.
Americans have gone. So that the NA, and the looters come in and they take all our stuff, right? And then
Yep,
the media is brought in, and then they're showed all the prison cells and all that stuff. So in terms of, uh, the the press that we got at the time, I remember seeing this. It was atrocious. I mean, we
right.
looked like a bunch of clowns pulling out of Bagram. It's like we disappeared in the middle of the night. When it should
Yeah,
have been done professionally, there should have been a change of command ceremony done, a handover ceremony, and established, left seat, right seat at Bagram because you got all these other things that are there. The air traffic control
yep,
center. You've got the perimeter that should have been
yep,
secured. You've got all the other, a lot of sensitive gear was left behind
yep,
that the looters took. So that was probably presage. It could, shows that the things to come. The way we were handling it, right? And
right. Well, and
my concern was it wasn't planned. It just we waved this fairy wand hoping that it would happen, and it sent the wrong message. It left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. Go ahead.
right. Yeah, and so forget like putting aside the fact the strategic location that Bagram has as
Yeah.
far as for the entire region.
Right.
Um, the maintaining the relationship and the alliance and developing what the future government would look like because
Right.
quite frankly it goes back into it, not like I'm a lover of Soviets or Russians, but the fact that they looked at trying to integrate, they left room in the governance for what the opposition was, for after the withdrawal. Like in our case, it was, this cloud of secrecy and hey, we're just going to leave in the middle of the night. We don't want to give anything up. And again,
Yeah. I mean it.
these are people that we've, that have given a lot to work with us, that we've given a lot to work with
Right.
them.
It's not who we are. That's not how we do things.
Right.
That's my point
Right.
because we wouldn't want to be treated like that. So now the next point is, Austin Miller, General Miller, who I've got incredible amount of respect for because, he
Yep.
had the moral courage and the conviction to say this plan is going to go south really quick and I don't want to be part of it, right?
Right.
And he retires, right? And in my
Right.
opinion, he should remain the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff for exhibiting, that physical and moral courage that he had. And we all know about his background, former, Delta Force operator and all that stuff. But when you come forward, you fast forward to that time frame, we know that this handoff is happening because we're in mid-July time frame, and within a month, this is going to happen, right? We have to
Right.
pull out by 31 August because the president wants to, in synchronization with the 9/11 anniversary that's coming up. So Austin is gone. That command, Resolve Hope, is dissolved. McKenzie's sitting in Tampa, right?
Right.
You guys are in
Yep.
Qatar. You guys are in Qatar.
Yep. Yep.
Militarily, who's in charge in Kabul? So that's the first point, that question I want to ask. And the second point is diplomatically, who's in charge? Now, in our side conversation, the ambassador's on vacation while this critical event is about to happen. So the
Right.
ambassador's gone, the four-star general's gone. Who's running the show in Kabul?
Right. And I think that that's when Pete Paisley, who was flown in as, was going to be a different mission. This is
Right,
that then evolved into like, hey, guess what? You're now the guy on the ground for
right,
what this is, and this is, and as this is falling apart fast, like you're the guy standing here. So now you've got him, and then and this is um, pre like sounding, ring the bell, Taliban are in the Kabul and call the Neo. If you go back, you and I talked previously about how, the original plan was to go to zero.
Right.
And like, nothing says you're going to have a Neo like draw down to zero. And so the question is raised, well, how are you going to do a diplomatic security mission? Like, as far as like are you going to have people in the embassy? So then they changed that to 650. But I know one of the questions General Mundy had asked was, you're drawing down to zero, like you've got 2,500 forces there now.
Right.
Like it's stable. Like continue like with the civs, with the original plan was September 11th was the actual date. That
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
backed up by McKenzie.
Right.
Um, and because like, why not give another reason for celebration? But with with regards to the gosh, with the timeline, okay, we're going to draw to 650, and then ultimately that triggered the evacuation, and then more forces had to get sent in. Initially with the two Marine elements, but ultimately it was too much, and you had General Donahue with the 82nd come in and kind of help took over most of the perimeter, with the exceptions of northeast and Abbey Gate.
Yeah. So the now Mackenzie wrote a book called Melting Pot, right?
Right,
So in that book, he mentions that he submitted four courses of actions to the National Security Council, right? And now, before I go into those four courses of action, I just want to talk about it. Now, I
right,
taught planning. I wrote the Marine Corps doctrinal pub on the Marine Corps planning process. And we used to always warn the planning teams never submit a throwaway course of action, because the danger in that is that the commander or the president may select that, right? So that's
right.
always a danger. So I just want to go over the four courses of actions
Yeah,
that according to his book. Number one was maintain 2,500 U.S. Special Forces, right, in Afghanistan, and also keep 8 bases. That's the first core course of action. 2,500 with 8 bases, right? So if I'm the president looking at that course of action, I'm looking at that saying, well, that's not what the agreement says with the Taliban, right? The agreement is no
right,
bases, right? That's what we agreed
right,
to. But the first one says 2,500 with 8 bases. So I discount that one. The second one says reduce to 1,800 troops, U.S. forces, and keep 3 bases, including Bagram, right? So that's the second course of action. Now, again, the same thing. Well, that's not the agreement we have with the Taliban. We got to give up the bases, right?
right,
Okay, so that's a throwaway. The third one says complete military withdrawal, right? With maintaining embassy presence. Um, Okay, that one kind of makes sense, right? But that's assuming that the Afghan government remains intact and the ANA and the ANP, the Afghan National Forces, can provide the security. That's the big
big
assumption
assumption.
there, right? And that kind of fell out the wayside once Kabul collapsed. And the
Yep,
last one was the complete pullout with no diplomatic presence. That's the COA that he presented. And guess which one did Biden take? He took the one that one because it suited not only the agreement that we had with the Taliban, but it fulfilled the requirement that we're done with Afghanistan, not realizing that the agreement with the Taliban was really that, hey, the Taliban and the Afghan government need to have a peace deal. That's the first part of it.
right.
The U.S. is going to pull back, okay? And so we never took that into account in these courses of actions that he submitted to the National Command Authority. And Biden ends up picking number four. Now, the problem with number four is all of a sudden, number four sort of collapses onto itself because the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police collapsed.
Right.
Literally collapsed. The Taliban basically gave
Yep.
an option. You can come be our brothers, or there's going to be retribution. So, and in my opinion, there's a lot of collusion going on also between the ANF and the Taliban all throughout that time, as you well know, with all
Yes.
the trucking contracts and whatnot to keep them safe. And there's a lot of these rumors were verified that we were paying these trucking companies to bring our supplies all the way from Pakistan into Afghanistan, and so they wouldn't be attacked. We were paying the Taliban off, not directly, but indirectly through security companies and whatnot. And
Right.
that was going on, right? So that's how the Taliban was being funded. So the question I would have is, and the reason I asked that question was, why did the planning not take place with General Miller as opposed to Tampa? I think that was a fatal error. If you go back, you want the guy on the ground because he can smell it,
Right.
right? He can sense it. He goes
Mhm.
to the presidential palace and he knows what the rumor control is. But as soon as Miller left, we don't have eyes and ears anymore at that echelon, right? There's no daily meetings,
Exactly.
weekly meetings, and
Right.
talking to those people, right? So I think we lost a lot there. And then the ambassador's gone. He's on vacation, and the Secretary of State's in the Hamptons, right? He's
Right.
he's hanging on the Hampton. And frankly, I mean, me looking at this, it seems like nobody gives a shit, you know?
Right.
And there's all these changes, the political dynamics that are happening in the United States now. In DC, we got to keep in mind. Milley's about to retire, right?
Right.
So they need a replacement for Milley. Who are the guys that they're considering? CJ Brown, Dave Berger, and Frank McKenzie, right? And there's nothing
Right.
better to cap your career off than being the Commandant of the Marine Corps and, chairman, being a combatant commander at CENTCOM, which is very prestigious, and being a chairman. So all
Right.
these things are playing into this, right? And this
Right.
political military strategy that we're developing. And I think that's where things run amok. And what really pisses me off, and obviously you as well, with your all the troop time, you got more troop time than I do, is we throw these brave Marines out there, based on stupid decisions and based on, self-serving interests. And I have an incredible amount of respect for Austin Miller. Now imagine if the other generals, the four stars, Milley, McKenzie, and Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, had backed Miller up and told the president that this is a bad plan. We cannot go down to zero. We need to maintain Bagram. We need to maintain that. And, the horse shit that I hear is, well, that was the agreement that President Trump signed. Well, that's bullshit, right? Because a
Right.
president has it's not a treaty. Congress hasn't ratified it. It's an agreement, and you can modify
Right.
agreement based on conditions. The conditions are that the Taliban didn't come to a peace deal with the Afghan government, right? So
Right.
therefore, we're drawing until that happens.
Right.
You got to live up to your part of the deal, and that's the type of negotiations we need. So my question to you would be, you know, so that we know the overall plan was mucked up, right? Between this playing ping pong between Kabul and between Tampa. We know that, right? We there was no
Right.
clear definitive planning that was going on. And the general in Kabul didn't support the plan. And he said, you know what? I'm out. I'm done. I'll retire. Thank you very much. So, but and let's talk about command and control. Now, we talked about General Mundy wanting to extend his retirement and saying, fine, you can put that two-star as MARCENT behind me, but I'll go forward and manage this and lead the troops in theater. And Berger turned that down. And what was he thinking there? Do you have any insight on that?
I have no insight, but this is where like that's one of those almost like a foreshadowing event. And it was one of the things I remember in conversation with General Mundy being is like, as far as, overall C2, but also the ability to provide a screen for the JTF because he's like, there's going to be a lot of attention for this. And if you then go forward to, as far as the investigation, and I know we'll talk about that, but one of the things that came up was all the external pressure from, political, military officials
Yeah.
calling directly down to the JTF, calling directly down to US 4A, so Admiral
Mhm.
Vasely. And I'll say, attempting to call down to General Donahue, who was like, who didn't turn on a phone. Was like, I'm
Yeah.
not taking any calls. Um,
Good.
like I'm focused on security. That's what I got. That's my piece. And but the amount of time that was taken from everybody from the president, the first lady, elected officials, the Pope, calling to say, hey, get these people at the,
My guy is out there. Yeah.
right, right. And that taking up time. But to come back to what you were saying, like planning from Tampa is different than planning when you actually know, live, and work with the people that with what you're going to be executing.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
Napoleon said it best, right? The moral is to the physical is 3:1. Like I can think from Tampa, like, I can plan in a vacuum and say, yeah, Afghan security forces are going to provide security for
Right.
this, Kabul, the embassy. That's planning in a vacuum without saying, like, hey, talking to my Afghan counterpart, like, hey, no kidding, like, if we pull out 100% U.S. personnel, are you going to be able to maintain security at the airfield?
No.
And not just, not, I mean, like at different levels, like, as you and I both know, you're going to get a different view down at the soldier level than you
Absolutely.
are up at the 4-star level.
You'll get ground
You know,
troops.
right. It's like, hey, no, you know what?
Yeah.
I'm, I'm, I'm Pashtun, and I'm
I'm
up
not
here
sticking around. Yeah. I'm
yeah,
going home.
I'm up here in the land of the Hazaras. I'm going
Yeah.
down and defend my family.
Yeah.
Like I'm going back to my family. I'm not staying here.
But that's a
So
great point you bring up, CJ. We created the Afghan National Army in our image.
I hope you enjoyed listening to Colonel C.J. Douglas and his experiences involved in the withdrawal from Afghanistan. I'll drop part 2 of this series later on in the week. In the meantime, please leave a comment and let us know what you think. Stay rugged, stay united. Khan out.